world of the internet, Zachary Alexander Reed here on the Genesis belt, and moving right along through the Batman games, we have Batman Returns. This game is based on the second movie by Tim Burton, just like the first one. There are several different versions of this game depending on the system that you're playing on. For example, there was the MS-DOS version, Amiga version, and Nintendo version. But I'll be playing the Sega Genesis version, of course. This is a fresh game for me. I've never played it before, so I am cautiously optimistic. I'm hoping that it's at least better than Batman Revenge of the Joker. You couldn't even punch in that game. Before the game starts, you're greeted to an in-game scene where Batman grapples up a building, fighting off some thugs on the way. Once he's at the top, we see the woman being held hostage. Penguin then attacks her with bats, causing her to fall. Batman jumps down to save her, but it's too late. She's already hit the pavement before he gets to her. This is exactly what happens in the movie. Penguin kills the Ice Queen and frames Batman for the murder. And this is the scene where the game starts. After that, I'm at the start menu. We have two selections, start and options. In options, you can do a sound test, change the player count, and change the controls. I'm not going to change from the default settings unless I have to, so let's start the game. The levels in this game are broken into acts, and each act has several different sections. The acts begin with an animation of the Batmobile power sliding on screen with no background. The bat symbol appears, revealing the stage name and the number. Then Batman jumps out of the Batmobile, and mid-jump, the Batmobile fades out and the level fades in. This game looks pretty good. The colors and sprites are detailed and go well together. It does not look like color barf. Batman looks confident again, and he's been hitting the gym since the first Batman game. Alright, time to move around and get a feel for these controls. The C button jumps, the B button punches, and pressing left or right on the D-pad while punching will kick. Down on the D-pad while punching is a low kick, and jumping while punching results in a magnificent jump punch. The A button throws a special weapon from your utility belt. You can access the utility belt by pressing start, which also pauses the game, and we'll get to that in a minute. If you hold up or down on the D-pad for a second, the camera will move in that direction. It wouldn't be so bad if the wait time for the camera was a little longer, but it happens within a second of pressing the button. You can go down a platform by jumping while crouching. Holding up on the D-pad and then C fires a grappling hook upwards. If it attaches to a surface, pressing C again will reel Batman to the platform above. There is a noticeable animation lag for Batman to look upwards in order to fire the grappling hook, and it's probably the single worst complaint I have about the controls. You can also grapple swing by jumping and then pressing C. Batman will fire the grappling hook in an upward diagonal angle in the direction you're facing, allowing you to latch onto a surface and swing over gaps and platforms. Once you let go, though, you can't grapple again until you land. You can't grapple ceiling to ceiling. You're Batman, not Spider-Man. Lastly, by jumping and holding A, you can glide. And those are all of the controls, but there's also a variety of weapons to choose from in the utility belt. There are 5 in total, each varying in power, versatility, and supply. From left to right, we start with the Batarang, a simple weapon usually in large supply. You can throw it straight ahead or slightly diagonal by pressing up or down while throwing it. It does a small amount of damage, but it's slightly stronger than a punch, and can sometimes stun enemies, including bosses. Next is the Smoke Bomb, which doesn't do damage, but paralyzes enemies. When they're paralyzed, you can walk right through them, or kill them in one punch if you're not the passive type of Batman. It's thrown in an arc, so you can't hit far away enemies, but you can hit enemies on lower platforms your Batarangs can't reach. The weapon in the center is the Bat Swarm. Batman opens up his cape, sending a swarm of bats straight ahead to attack the enemy. It can do a very large amount of damage, and can paralyze, and is basically a weapon for bosses, which means you typically don't get a lot of them. Next is what I'm guessing is an attack with the grappling hook. It looks kind of like the grappling hook and has limited range like the grappling hook. It only goes in a straight path, but it does a large amount of damage, so bosses only. Finally, there's the Big Homing Batarang. It's a big Batarang that homes in on the nearest enemy and does a bunch of damage. It can also slightly stun enemies, including bosses, and is usually in short supply, so, you know, use it on the bosses. You can find power-ups scattered throughout each stage to stock up for bosses or enemies that are particularly pesky in a level. There's other power-ups including extra health, more stamina for your gliding ability, and an extra life represented by what I assume is a cape. That looks like a cape, I guess? What is that? Combine the grappling hook, the gliding, the combination of attacks, and the different weapons you can use, this game already has a lot going for it at the very beginning. There is one problem with the controls though. There's a tiny wait time for each input when doing more than one thing. So it's like a frame lag or a fighting game, but I'm pretty sure it was designed to be like this on purpose. One last thing to talk about, and that's the HUD, which is at the bottom of the screen. From left to right, we start with the score counter. Next is Batman's health bar, and if a boss is present, their health will display here as well, similar to the first Batman game. Then we have your life counter, which is represented by Batman's cowl, but a number where his face should be. Then there's the glide meter, because Batman has limited glide ability apparently. Last, on the far right of the HUD, is the current special weapon equipped and how many you have left. Alright, with all of this in mind, it's time to play the game. Even knowing all of this, however, this game is not an easy one. Is it because of how spoiled I've become playing all these newer games these past few years? Or is it because of bad game development and bugs out the ass? Let's find out. The first level is Gotham City. You start out on the rooftops of Gotham, and if you jump, you're immediately attacked by a gargoyle sitting above you. You can take them out with one punch when they approach you. Other enemies include clowns that can flip towards you and punch and kick as well. These enemies are hard to dodge and take 2 hits to beat, so it's hard to hit them without taking a hit. They also hide in barrels and throw grenades. When you defeat an enemy, instead of falling over or just disappearing, they teleport off to jail. There's even little faces on some of the background art that can spit down a few fireballs when you approach them, but you can punch the fireballs and not get hurt, which is amusing. There's a lot of platform jumping and swinging you have to do right off the bat. If you go too high in this level, you might get hit by bombs on parachutes falling from the sky. If you fall or jump too many platforms down, you'll eventually die. There's no real indication of how far down the point of no return is, except by using the camera controls, which causes you to have to stop and crouch every time you want to check. You'll also notice that Batman walks kinda slow in this game. It really bothered me when I first played this game that you can't run, but I eventually got used to it. And besides, if you try to move too fast in this game, you're more than likely going to be hit by an enemy just barely off screen. So after jumping through a bunch of scaffoldings and rooftops, you eventually reach an endpoint where you can't move any further to the right. At first I thought I had to make a leap of faith and subsequently lost a life. Turns out you have to go to the top 3 platforms at that point to fight the boss, which is Catwoman. This boss, like most bosses in this game I found out, are aggravating when you first have to fight them. First off, she can do a backflip, closing in distance and damaging Batman if she touches you, as well as being invincible during the attack. She also has a whip, which reaches farther than Batman's punches or kicks. She's very quick, and it seems the only way to avoid her and get attacks in successfully without getting hit is to hop up and down platform to platform to lure her in to follow you. If you close in on her while she jumps, you can get a hit in and jump to another platform before she can hit back. Eventually, I learned if she's on a platform above you, and you punch her the moment she tries to jump down, she'll actually fail the jump, and will have to try again. You can spam this over and over until there's no room on the roof left, and you can knock her off the building. She doesn't die though, and can come back up from the lower platform to hit you. She's actually a pretty easy boss, and rightly so for being a first boss of a game. After beating her, Batman breaks into one of these apartment buildings to do a little inspection. There are so many infractions here. First off, the whole building is at an angle, and the outside wall is so busted it looks like an obstructed foreground graphic, so navigation is already a little difficult. There's a few exposed ventilation shafts just sticking out of the floor, and if you don't break one of the falling statue heads into each one, another hazardous infraction by the way, then Batman will get sucked into one while advancing and go back to the top of the apartment. There's water pipes in the floor that can squirt hot water, and several clowns on unicycles riding through the halls and shooting off machine guns. These guys take 2 hits to kill and are difficult to avoid on the slanted plane. On top of everything else, one entire floor is just a bunch of pitfalls down to the next floor, which is covered in spikes. You can swing through this part and get a few power-ups if you're feeling risky. Thankfully, due to the short length of this level, it's not too difficult. It's even possible to tank through the level if you find all the health pickups. There's one final open vent at the end, and you jump down the last hole to the boss. This is when I noticed that whenever the game transitions you to another scene, it refills your health bar. After falling through the floor and out the back of the building, you're faced with a statue of two giant men kneeling on a platform, each one on a side of the screen holding a lever. You can jump onto the platform and onto a statue's knee in order to damage the head. They attack by pulling their levers, which fire a gear from underneath them at an upward angle, and then it'll bounce around the ground until it goes off screen. They can also shoot fireballs from their mouths at a downward angle. These attacks are random for both statues and can be difficult to avoid at times. If you defeat one head though, you can just sit on their knee and throw batarangs at the other one until it's defeated. Once they're both defeated, you can continue to the next part of the stage, but not before getting a few hidden power-ups hiding beneath the foreground. This looks like another cathedral level in a Batman game. Enemies here include gargoyles, which take 2 hits now, flipping clowns, which take 3 hits now, and new clowns with guns that fire 3 shots at different angles, and they take 3 hits. This level is filled with small spike traps and pitfalls, some of which are hidden behind pillars in the foreground. That means there's a lot of jumping involved here, which doesn't sound so bad, but usually when you try to jump over a hazard, it's right into an enemy that was off screen. They'll jump right at you, getting in a free hit. You can jump away from them, but if you land too close, they'll just give chase. If you jump just the right distance, you can derp them into not following you. Batarangs are useful here if you don't want to re-engage them. At the end of each hall is a gun clown. It's possible to avoid their bullets if you wait and jump over the second shot in his loop to close in and kill him before he can get another shot. After beating one of these guys, you'll have to jump up onto the platform he was standing on and grapple up onto the next floor. This level repeats itself a bit for the first few floors. Jump over spikes and pits, fight some clowns and gargoyles, grab power-ups hidden behind pillars, get to the end, and grapple up to the next floor. After doing this a few times, you reach the top floor where there's no roof, but a bunch of small platforms coming out of the wall above you. You can grapple these to continue climbing. As you climb, you'll be attacked by new gargoyles that hop from platform to platform trying to knock you off, and standing on one of these platforms too long will result in it falling under your weight, so you can't stay still. Reaching the top of this part are 2 stationary gargoyle statues spawning the animated ones. Once you destroy them, another platform on a chain comes down from the top of the screen. This platform will take you to the very top of the cathedral in the bell tower to face off with the Penguin. If you don't immediately jump off the platform that brought you here, it'll crumble away and you'll fall, so choose which side you want to fight Penguin quickly. This fight was actually pretty easy. Penguin flies in the air in one direction, throwing bombs in an arc to the ground in front of him. As long as you're not in front of him, you'll be fine. Once he gets a certain distance, he'll lower down and attempt to rush into Batman. This is where you can get your hits in and knock him back. He'll then fly back up and start the cycle over again. You can pretty much hit him at any point he's in the air if you can reach him. However, when you hit him while he's throwing bombs, it'll immediately trigger him to lower and rush, and touching him will do damage. After defeating him, the background goes black, and Penguin flies away and the stage is over. Yep. All of that was Stage 1. This is gonna be a longer game than I thought. Stage 2 is Shrek's Wonderland. I know what you're thinking, and no, it's not that Shrek. It's Max Shrek from the Batman Returns. So this is about the only time in history where you can say that Christopher Walken actually played Shrek. So you start this stage in a grimy looking street. If you move to the right, you're assaulted from off screen by a biker with a skull helmet. He moves in so fast that there's no time to react to him if you don't already know he's coming. This whole level is nothing but these biker dudes. Sometimes they come from the right, sometimes they come from the left and fire a machine gun at you, and sometimes they just fall from the sky. The noise they make is awful. This can get pretty annoying, but thankfully, this level isn't very long, and you can tank through these guys until you get to the last part. There's even a health pickup right before the boss. You then walk into a room with some people floating in water through the background windows. The roof is visible and has a hole on each side, along with a big sign that spells out Shrek. and of course, the boss of this level. He's a bald, buff man wearing parachute pants and genie shoes. He moves back and forth on the roof, following Batman's movements. He'll grab debris from the roof as well as letters from the sign and throw them down to hit you. You have to grapple up through one of the holes in the ceiling in order to reach him. And if you get too close, he can hit you with a really heavy punch or kick, dealing massive damage and knockback. This is one of the bosses you want to use one of your more powerful special weapons on. Just 3 or 4 hits from him and you're done. So you need to keep your distance and damage him with the grappling attack or the big homing batarang, until his health is at least lower than yours. Then you can move in and get some punches and kicks in. If you're patient, you can use your batarangs instead, if you don't mind having to go back and forth through the room a bunch of times. After he's defeated, he explodes a few times and we fade into the next level. It appears to be some sort of empty mall, with TVs in the background, escalators, chandeliers, and fire? The farther up you go, the less mall and more fire you see. We got some new enemies. The first one encountered is a roller skater wearing an old Spanish helmet wielding a bat. They roll up to Batman and stop just short of your kick range before they swing. Unless you want to use batarangs, you'll have to jump over the swing and close in while landing just to get close enough for an attack. 3 hits and they're dead. Another new enemy appears to be a wild-looking woman with throwing knives. Are they topless? I think they're topless. They'll stand in the background until you get close. Then they'll jump down and start throwing knives. You can jump over the knives and close in to low kick her 3 times, and she'll die. Or you can duck under the knives and throw batarangs. One more new enemy is another clown who waits around the escalators just to drop some bouncing balls on your head while you climb. You can weave between the balls, but sometimes, unless you're behind the guy throwing them, you're gonna take a hit. They take 4 hits to defeat, and thankfully this level has a branching path that can avoid all that noise. Also, the gun clowns are back. They basically stand guard in front of empty elevator shafts that you occasionally have to use to grapple to the next floor. So the level itself is a broken down mall of sorts. There's a part where you swing from a chandelier, which is pretty cool. As you continue upward, the building starts to peel away and you can see more and more steel beams exposed, as well as more damaging fire. Overall, once you figure out how to beat the enemies, this level isn't hard. It just feels long with the enemy volume. At the top floor, we see it looks different than the rest. It's darker and has stone walls, and isn't falling apart. Moving on, you take out a few more enemies and reach another room, which is different than the rest again. The floor is wood, and the wall is green, with large windows taking up most of the wall. Then Catwoman comes out of nowhere. Didn't I beat you already? Well, looks like it's time for round 2, but this time there's no extra platforms to exploit. You have to fight her without any tricks, one-on-one. Your combos of jumping and punching and kicking against her flipping, whipping, and clawing. Or you could just take her out with a few special weapons. If you decide to fight her without them, especially if you have low health, you're gonna have some difficulty. Once she's beat, she runs away and the screen fades to black. We then fade back in to see a giant ball and chain lowering from the ceiling with Penguin. Then he cuts the chain, and before I can even react, the ball rolls over Batman and dies. Well, fuck. So this entire sequence is just running from a giant ball of death and jumping down through these holes to escalators until you reach the bottom. Don't go in the last hole though, because that one kills you. The ball will fall into the last hole at the bottom floor, and moving left, we once again face off with the Penguin. He flies left and right using his umbrella like the last time, but instead of dropping bombs, he throws saw blades. He throws them outward and they boomerang underneath him, either close to the floor, which you can jump over, or a higher one, which you can duck under. He'll also lunge at you again, but instead of slowly moving down to Batman's level and just trying to touch him, Penguin jettisons himself from his current position, propellers first, straight to Batman. It took me a lot of tries, but I did find a fairly easy way to beat this boss. If you can manage to get in front of Penguin as he's coming down and jump punch him right when he starts to move left or right, then he'll start dropping down, never throwing his saw blades. Then you can get some more free hits in before he rises back up. Rinse and repeat. You can use special weapons on him when he drops, but I find punching is the more satisfying way to beat him. Once he's beaten, the background fades away, Penguin flies off, and stage 3 begins. Welcome to the Red Triangle Circus. We start off in what looks to be a park at night. There are huge holes in parts of the ground, so you have to climb on top of walls and jump into these cages in order to progress. It is possible to glide across some of these holes, but it's really difficult to gauge the distance. Climbing the walls started out tough too, as there are some parts that are small to grapple and you can glitch into the side of the wall. Thankfully, you can just walk out of the glitch and try again. The flipping clowns are back in this level, and they can now fire 2 small projectiles when they jump, making them even more difficult to avoid, but they only take 2 hits this time. 2 new enemies introduced here are fire-themed. One is a thinly devil man who can spew a straight stream of fire from his mouth and retract it back. You can stand back and wait for the attack to finish and jump in for an attack. He takes 3 hits unless you use batarangs, which they can duck under if you're not crouching. The other is what appears to be a leprechaun that lobs fireballs at you, often from off-screen before you even get to them, and they can do a lot of damage. If you get too close, they'll retract into their hat and try to move behind Batman. You can duck under the first fireball he throws, but the second one is too low. If you don't close the gap quick enough, he'll hit you with a fireball, and once you do, you'll have to low kick him as he retracts before he can move. You can't jump very well in the enclosed areas they're in, so this is the only way I found to getting past these guys. This can be a difficult level, and took me a good number of frustrating attempts before figuring out how to get past most of the enemies. The flipping clowns are the most annoying here. There's no real way to avoid their jumps and projectile attacks. I put enough time and effort into other enemies of the game, but this one was just not worth it. I just let them hit me and move on. Once to the end here, we move on to a section where you have to ride on 2 small Ferris wheels over a deadly pit of nothing. There's a few gun clowns on the center platforms of the Ferris wheel, as well as a few devil guys on the wall at the beginning and one at the end. The gun clowns take 6 hits to kill this time, but they're easy to avoid and destroy by staying on the roof of the centerpiece on the Ferris wheel and just punching them. If you're feeling extra risky, you can go for the power-ups in this section. At the end of the second Ferris wheel, you can just glide to the end and it'll take you to the next part. It's pretty short. The next part is not so short. This level takes place in the circus tent and starts in a hall full of mirrors. As Batman passes by these mirrors, sometimes one in front of him will spawn a tall and horrific looking clown that jumps out of the mirror and lobs a bomb at you. If you space it right, you can duck under the bomb and low kick him 4 times and teleport him to jail. After going through a handful of these mirrors and clowns, the hall opens up into an area with a platform in the background. As you move along, you come across little booths with clowns inside and the occasional power-up hidden in the compartment underneath. When approaching them though, they defend themselves with a spring-loaded boxing glove. You can easily duck under the attack and avoid the glove by standing directly in front of the booth. 6 punches will deactivate the boxing glove. As you traverse through the booth clowns, you'll also be attacked by the occasional biker, who attacks just as suddenly now as he did before. I basically had to take their licks and dispatch them with batarangs. After the booth clowns and bikers, we then come to a rope leading up to an area for acrobats, and a new devil guy with a pitchfork, who immediately fires a long wave of fire from his pitchfork straight ahead. It's pretty much impossible to avoid. Past him is a set of trapeze platforms, but there's no swinging, just more devils with pitchforks. It's very hard to get through this area without getting hit by fire or running into a devil. There's a net at the bottom of all the platforms, but there's holes where the poles come through, and sometimes a devil will shoot his fire downward and put a new hole in the net. The only thing under the net is a black chasm of death. There's a few power-ups you can try to nab under the net at the very end, but I so far haven't found a safe way to get them. If you can get past this part, the only thing left between you and the boss is 1 more devil and 1 more biker. Once past them, you make it to a couple of ropes crossing each other and leading up to another tightrope with a doorway on each side. Clowns on unicycles pop out of these doorways and can fire bombs down at the ground, as well as fire bullets once again. They move back and forth between all of the ropes, firing their weapons and trying to run into Batman. If you have enough health, you can easily make it to the tightrope at the top and take them out one at a time. Otherwise, you'll just have to weave between all of the shots while navigating through the ropes, which can be tricky at times. This is the only boss battle that recycles enemies from the game in order to make a mini-boss. Once you kill 4 clowns, the boss battle is over. The next part is a train level. You start at the caboose and have to jump to the right, car to car, in order to progress. We see a new enemy. This is a green-suited sword swallower. Try saying that 5 times fast. When approached, he'll pull his sword out of his mouth and pull a few fencing moves. If you jump away from him, you can actually make him disengage and re-swallow his sword. This allows for easy attacks, and 5 hits takes him down. We also get a few more of the fire juggling leprechauns. These guys are there just to hit you right when you're jumping to another car to get a free hit in. A few of the carts also have hazards. Some have springboards that launch you back. The other hazard is a couple of saw blades that come out of the roof of a car. These giant blades start at each end of the car and then cross each other, moving side to side, only stopping briefly when they reach the edge. You have to time your jumps just right to jump between them. Once you get to the end of the enemies, the hazards, and the cars, you get to the locomotive, or the engine of the train. This is a hard boss. This is a frumpy looking clown wearing a purple onesie with pink polka dots. He's wielding a shovel and can reach pretty damn far with it. If you get hit by this attack, you'll take a lot of damage, as getting hit with a shovel typically does. This seems to be the only attack he has, and you'd think that this would make the fight easier. But he's not alone. Inside the engine room, you can see the penguin, and every once in a while he'll pull on a rope that sends 2 small walls of fire up for a short time. This also does a lot of damage, so you're constantly forced to move your location. I guess this is so you can't cheese the boss, as it makes timing the jumps even more difficult. If you have enough special weapons though, you can still cheese him and be done in seconds. There's also a health pickup dangerously close to the edge on the other side of the car, if you feel like going for that. Once you beat him, the clown teleports to jail like all the other baddies, but Penguin escapes through the level's transitional blackout with his umbrella once again. Act 4 is Into the Sewers, another sewer level. I gotta say, for a sewer level, this is one of the more creative ones I've seen so far. You have to navigate through these sewers by jumping and swinging on pipes that go across and diagonal, sometimes crossing each other, and always with water flowing over top of them, instead of inside them. Just like the last game, the water will push you back while walking, but you can also climb and slide down the diagonal pipes. There's also holes in the wall that have small platforms on them that you can jump on and swing from as well. On the bottom floor, there are walls with jutting metal sticking out that, if you walk into them, will do damage. There's a new enemy as well. He's another clown with what looks like a jack-in-the-box on a stand. When he moves the crank though, instead of a fun toy popping out, he fires 4 bullets straight ahead, one at a time in a slow succession. You'll want to wait until they're done firing before moving in. He'll take 4 hits to defeat, and you have to be quick because his cooldown for his weapon is deceptively short. The fire juggling leprechauns are back, and they can lob fire at Batman from quite a distance with the added height they get on the platforms in this level. The skaters with bats are back too, and they can also jump this time. This level has got some twists and turns in it, with a good number of power-ups hidden throughout. There are a lot of enemies here too, as well as a few pitfalls, so hunting them can be dangerous. If you're not careful, you can die a lot here. Thankfully, there's a health pickup on the bottom floor right before the boss. When you get to the boss, he immediately attacks you before you can even see him. He sends a fireball across a pipe that you're standing on, increasing speed as it gains distance. When you close in on him, you can see this boss is another clown, dressed in a bowler hat, a green shirt, and very long red striped pants on stilts. He's so tall that his feet go off screen. This guy will touch one of the 3 pipes Batman is standing on, and just like the first attack, he'll send a fireball across it. He'll repeat this attack until he takes damage. Once you hit him a few times, he lowers himself into the water below and then rises back up in a random spot. Then he'll just use his torch again. This is all he does the entire time. All you have to do is bait him into attacking the bottom floor. Then you can jump over the fireball and onto the center pipe. If you're close enough, you can hit him a few times to force him down before he can get another attack in. If you're not, then you're probably gonna get hit. Thankfully, there's a platform above all of this that you can grapple onto in order to swing into a health pickup if you need it. Once you beat him, he explodes a few times and we can continue the journey through the sewer. The first part of this section is a leap of faith. There's many of the small wall platforms scattered below the ledge you start on, as well as some more gun clowns. Going all the way to the right side without moving downward will result in finding a wall, so you're forced to go down at some point. Moving all the way to the bottom finds the water now damaging Batman, so no touching the bottom anymore. Before moving under the wall and on through the sewers, I accidentally found a pitfall that, instead of killing you, sends you to a hidden area. In this area, Batman is continuously falling through a never-ending well with power-ups scattered left and right. This well also loops, so if you miss one, you can wait for it to loop around again. When you've picked them all up, just hang a right and you can exit through a passage. You'll spawn right back to the level on a pillar right next to the hidden pitfall. This makes me wonder if other pitfalls throughout the game lead to more power-ups in hidden passageways. I'm not gonna do it right now, but maybe some other time. After getting past the high wall is a long section of twisting pipes to jump and swing through, all the while avoiding the acid at the bottom. To make things harder, there's even more clowns with guns shooting all over the place, and there's a high volume of these guys here. Because of the almost awkward placement of them as well, it's almost easier to just swing low and take the hits instead of stopping to kill the enemies. You're more likely to get hit by one clown while killing another. At the end of this section is a pool of more acid and more wall platforms that are just far enough from each other that you can't jump up to. You still have to grapple up in order to reach the final passage on the right wall, which is blocked by one more clown with a gun. After teleporting him to jail, you can walk through the passage and finally fight the boss. You immediately spawn in a room with wall platforms scattered around, and Batman drops down automatically to the left of a pit, and to the right of the pit is Penguin. He's got a large cannon of some kind. This weapon will periodically shoot a stream of acid at Batman, and Penguin doesn't stick around with the weapon though. It can fire on its own. Instead, he flies platform to platform and uses the gun in his umbrella to take pot shots at Batman. He can also do damage by touching Batman as he flies around the stage. This boss may seem difficult at first, but there's a few things that can make it easier. First off, the acid cannon's range is limited, so it can't reach a few of the platforms. Second, you can get behind the cannon with no problem and hit it a few times to destroy it, leaving you to focus on Penguin. Third, Penguin's shots can only go at a certain angle like some of the gun clowns, so it's fairly avoidable. And fourth, the platforms he flies to are in a pattern, so it's easy to memorize where he'll land if you've already fought him a few times. The quickest way I found to beating him is to just ignore the cannon and go straight for the Penguin. If you're quick enough, you can jump to the first platform Penguin gets to and bank yourself against the wall that's nearby. He'll fly up to it to hit you, but you can tank through him and beat him to death before he can even move to the next platform. When Penguin is defeated, he opens the void to avoid death and sends Batman to the next act. Oops, I got a little hasty and skipped the title of Act 5. Well, it looks like an ice level, and judging by the architecture, Batman is still in the sewer, so we can just call this the Icy Sewers. And this is when the difficulty spikes. The first thing to mention, of course, is the sliding. The controls are a bit of a chore to get used to already, and adding a sliding mechanic to it makes this level particularly frustrating. There are tiny platforms you have to jump on at various points, and if you're not careful, you'll risk sliding right off. If you try to correct yourself, you might even fall off the other way. Not to mention the ice makes you slide down inclined surfaces. Speaking of surfaces, it took me a minute to realize that you can grapple onto the sewer grates in the background in this level. I thought it was just decoration, but it's actually an essential part of progressing through the level. There are also platforms that break if you stand on them or swing on them too long. There are spiked floors under inclines, so you'll slide right into them and take damage if you don't jump or glide over them. And of course, there are plenty of pitfalls to suck your lives right out of your cowl. There's a couple of walls that you can destroy for power-ups in one part, so there's a good surface to talk about. And those are just the level hazards. The enemies are even worse. First off, there's a new clown. This one has a rocket launcher that fires in a straight path, and then he has to reload for a few seconds. They're easy to take out if you wait for them to fire and then hit them 4 times. The wild topless women with throwing knives make another appearance here as well. On previous levels, these enemies were pretty easy to avoid and dispatch. On this level, however, they wreck my shit. The enemies are placed in what I can only describe as dickish places. They're placed on the top of inclines, throwing knives down at you while you're climbing. They're placed on ledges above platforms or inclines that you have to jump to. The worst offender though, the absolute worst offender in this entire game is placing an enemy on a small platform that you have to jump to over a pit while throwing knives at you while you're jumping to that platform, all covered in ice. This happens at the very end of this level, and it was very frustrating figuring out the best way to get past it. You end up having to fall down a hole onto a small platform with a row of other small platforms to the right, all dangling above a pit. You're immediately greeted by one of these enemies on an adjacent platform. The enemy will start throwing knives, so you have to crouch as soon as you land, or you'll get knocked off right away and lose a life. While crouching, you'll need to use a special weapon or a batarang to destroy them in order to advance. Each jump is a butt-clenching moment trying not to fail the landing or crouching. If you can manage to get through this icy hell and past the final enemy, then you're done with this section. Walk to the right and we fade into the next one. And thankfully, this part is easy peasy. We fade into Batman standing on a chunk of ice floating down a river to the right at the bottom of the sewer. There are other small pieces of ice on each side as well. At first I thought you were supposed to hop around these ice chunks, but no. This whole part is best played on the first larger chunk you start on the whole way through. Every few seconds an enemy will pop out of the snow on top of one of the ice chunks. We're attacked by the lanky mirror clowns, but their missiles home in on Batman now instead of dropping straight down. You can destroy these missiles with a batarang or even a punch without taking damage. We're also attacked by the rocket clowns again. This time Batman has time and space to punch their projectiles too. Enemies will spawn on the large platform that you stand on as well, and they'll damage you if you stay on. However, the enemies return to the snow after one shot and never return. This means it's easier to take the damage from these enemies rather than trying to kill them or risk falling to your death by jumping to another ice chunk. There's plenty of power-ups to pick up too. They appear above Batman as the chunks float by, and spawn almost as much as the enemies. All you have to do is just jump to pick them up. This section is also fairly short. Once you get to the end, the screen stops moving and you just fade away into the next section. Fading in, Batman is still on the floating ice. It's a bit darker here, and there's a few more power-ups to collect in this tunnel. Then we reach an open area with platforms stacked up in a small pyramid in the center. Moving on to the right, we see the tunnel continues, but it's blocked off by a large rubber ducky, and the penguin is riding its back. Upon reaching him, his health bar appears, and the battle begins. Penguin attacks by launching rocket-propelled penguins at Batman. They launch in a short arc from the ducky, pause for a moment in mid-air, and then propel straight to the left. They do this at a different elevation each time depending on where Batman is when they launch. If you try to stay close to the ducky and punch your way through this boss, then you're sadly mistaken. Trying to keep your balance on the slippery ice while hopping from chunk to chunk is already difficult, but avoiding the rocket penguins is near impossible while doing so. Additionally, the ducky has an absurd amount of health, so you'll be punching for a while anyways. After a few runs of trial and error, I found the best way to defeat this boss in my opinion. You'll need a lot of special weapons and batarangs, and thankfully the last few levels in this act were extremely generous with the power-ups. After activating the boss, you need to immediately go back to the pyramid and stay on the far right of the second highest platform. Now the rocket penguins can only go to their highest elevation when launching, and can be jumped over easily. In between the rocket penguins, you can crouch and fire a special weapon at the ducky. Since this boss has so much health, this match can take a while. The ducky cracks a little more every few hits to let you know that you're making progress, and once his health hits 0, he explodes and Penguin flies away. But wait! There's more! After defeating him, another platform appears above the pyramid. When you climb up to it, another appears above that. This continues for a bit as Batman continues to climb these platforms as they appear until the last one opens to the top floor. Moving to the right is a drop down to the final boss. Here we have to fight Penguin for the last time. This time he's sporting his pajamas instead of his suit, just like the end of the movie. There's a pit of ice water in the center of the stage with a short pillar jutting out in the middle. Penguin hides in the water water and jumps out onto either the right, left, or center platform, brandishing his umbrella. After a second or two, he'll fire a gray projectile that homes in on Batman and freezes him in place. Then he'll fire a red one that homes in and does damage. This attack will kill you with just a few hits, and avoiding it was difficult at first. You can jump over them with just the right timing. You can even destroy the gray projectile with one of your own, so there's no chance of being frozen for the next attack. Unfortunately, this doesn't work with the red projectile. Even so, Penguin is still pretty hard to hit. You can't get close without risking taking a hit from a projectile. I usually just used a bunch of special weapons on him and kept my distance. I collected plenty of them in the past 2 sections, so I can probably take his health down way before he can kill me. Unfortunately, there's more to this boss than just getting his health down to 0. If you move all the way to the far right of the stage, you'll see a machine on the wall emitting electricity. This machine will do a lot of damage to Batman if it hits you with a jolt. There's a couple of small pipes to the right of the machine, and you can climb up to them to reach it. If you manage to punch fast enough, you can destroy this machine fairly quickly and with minimal damage. However, you still have to avoid Penguin's projectiles as well as avoid touching him. Combine that with the machine shooting electricity and the damaging water, and you got damage coming at you at many angles. Thankfully, there's 2 health pickups during this boss battle, if you can get to them. One is right beside the machine, and the other is to the top left of the stage. Once you get Penguin's health to 0 and destroy the machine, the boss is finally over. Penguin jumps out of the water one last time, only to topple over as the machine explodes. Then he slides into the murky depths below. So the Penguin is defeated, but the game is not over. The scene opening up to the next stage begins, but this time it's interrupted. Instead of the bat signal appearing to show the stage name, Catwoman runs up and whips the Batmobile. Then she runs over to the side, prompting Batman to exit the vehicle and pursue. Following this is one last fight with Catwoman as the credits for the game roll by. Once again, you fight her on a rooftop, but this time there's frozen power lines above that occasionally drop sparks down, doing damage. This battle pretty much goes down the same way as the first time. Just get her to jump to the top platform and interrupt her jumping by punching her. Once her health reaches 0, she plummets to the ground and finally dies. Then, a bunch of cats approach her body and eat her until her sprite disappears. They leave, and the words "The End" appear on the screen with somber music playing. Yeah, this game doesn't really have a happy ending. So that was Batman Returns for the Sega Genesis. It started out frustrating, but it ended up being fun. All in all, Batman Returns is a really fun game, and I highly recommend it. It's the best one yet out of the 3 that I've played so far. I've even played it again, and found some more hidden power-ups and some other ways of fighting the bosses. Well, that's 3 down and 2 to go. I've beaten Batman, Batman Revenge of the Joker, and Batman Returns. There's only 2 games left, and I'm saving the best one for last. That being said, look forward to the next installment of the Genesis Belt, All of the Batmans, where I'm going to beat what I've been told is the worst Batman game for the Sega Genesis. I'll see you then.